Chief Justice Raymond Zondo says court performance targets set by the judiciary were mostly met in the 2021-2022 financial year. He was delivering the 5th annual judiciary report for the period under review at the Constitutional Court this morning. We speak to legal analyst Elton Hart about the relationship between the judiciary and fighting crime in South Africa. Thank you very much, Elton, for your time this afternoon. Maybe let's start with that on the back of the delivery by the Chief Justice of the state of the judiciary and the finances. What is the relationship between the judiciary and fighting crime in South Africa, with the very high crime levels and that grim report that was delivered by the police minister last week?
No, indeed. So there is a very close relationship between the crime-fighting agencies in our country and how the judiciary actually performs their duties. Because remember, the crime-fighting agencies is there to investigate and detect crimes. And once they detect or investigate crimes and they compile a docket, it's then handed over to the NPA, who then actually goes on to actually prosecute these dockets. And then the judiciary has to now make a finding to say that is there sufficient evidence or not. Now, how this affects, because if the crime-fighting agencies is not preparing a docket well, the NPA cannot present a good and solid, strong case against a person, even if we know that that person is the real perpetrator. And then it comes down to the finances, where you find out that maybe we don't have enough court personnel, maybe we don't have recording machines. And I know Judge Sutherland, just a little while ago, they were stressing about courts being under-resourced. But I also think that when we look at these things, people tend to focus on what is needed in high courts. But if one has to go one level down to the lower courts, they are even more frustrated because load shedding hits them. There's no generators at the courts. And that makes it so difficult, where you have a court roll with 60 matters on the court roll, and a magistrate is dependent on whether Eskom switches on and off the electricity. So that is how these things are intertwined and interdependent for them to actually function properly.
We'll get to the courts and the judges in a moment. Let's start with the NPA. I mean, it's been getting glowing reviews from the powers that be. How would you assess its performance, right, in executing its duties? We know they have issues of capacity, but there's also some rogue elements within the NPA. Today's Mail and Guardian leading with how NPA shielded Bushiri, for example, and that's just but one.
No, that's indeed so, and people might not want to talk about it and say that there's instances, and I know of personal instances where there's members in the NPA, and I'm not saying the entire NPA is corrupt, but there's members that works within the structures of the NPA that's corrupt. And they work hand in hand with corrupt police officers. So some dockets get struck off the roll, gets nolly prosecute, and then the complainant sits there and think, but what is happening to my matters 2-3 years down the line, not knowing what is happening, but because there is a few individuals that's rotten to the core that sits in these institutions where you do law enforcement and as well as prosecution, and then it looks like the entire machine is not working. But what also sort of have distract or sort of have derail the efforts by the NPA is that you will find like where the NPA is like not so long ago they had like approximately 600 vacancies that was not filled. So that already puts strain on the current infrastructure, the current crop of workforce that's there. So they have to work longer hours. And working longer hours makes them tired. Sometimes they don't focus properly on a docket, and then things fall through the crack. And that is normal, because a person can only do so much and has so much capacity. So I don't want to justify how the NPA is working, but I'm saying that is something that happens with the NPA, and one needs to be cognizant of these facts. But we also need to know that within the police, and I'm saying, if I say police, I'm talking about now our law enforcement agencies, you have corrupt officials. Within the NPA, you have corrupt officials, and that already then puts an extra burden on us fighting crime in law enforcement agencies, as well as actually putting the perpetrators to book when we get to the courts. Then you get a case that comes before a judge or a magistrate, and the magistrate says, but there's not sufficient evidence, and then he has to make the obvious decision to say the person is found not guilty or the matter is struck off the courtroom.
It's been a busy week for the Judicial Conduct Tribunal, with judges accused of wrongdoing of the highest order. And so we highlight the problems of the NPA. Did we hear an honest assessment from the Chief Justice about some of the conduct of judges?
No, the thing is, like, for me, what I know is, like, there is always two sides to a story. And obviously he's presenting and saying that everything is under lock, everything is under control. I would also think to see that there was instances where judges had free rein to do what they wanted to do. They were not brought to book for actions or inactions that was not taken. So for me, I think that there is still a lot of strides to be made. I'm not saying they're not trying, but I say for the perception that's out on the street is that some judges feel like they're untouchable. They can do whatever they want, whatever they please. And I mean, currently we're sitting with the Judge Slope saga down in Cape Town, and that entire division is in total disarray and chaos. That you have a judge president and a deputy judge president that's currently fighting with each other within a division. That's not good for the access to justice and actually promoting justice and the confidence in the public. And then you have a lot of other cases up in Gauteng where you hear that maybe somehow people are throwing around allegations that judges has been bought or judges has been corrupted in a certain way to make certain findings. And then you get also now where we have, which I say the public should be very wary of, where you get political parties now. One day the judge rules in favor of them, then it's a good judge, and the next day the judge rules against them, then the judge is now being unduly influenced, or the judge received a brown envelope. So that is all the things that the judges has to juggle with and play with and say, how do I actually conduct myself or do the business of the court or of the day so that I'm not perceived to being biased towards a specific candidate or to be supporting a certain faction. And that's the extra pressures now that's on judges. And I say that they can improve, because we as legal practitioners should always try and improve how we do our business and how we are perceived by the general public in being ethically right and morally in tune with our constitution. So I think to just say that everything is hunky-dory is also not for me. It's not on.
Yeah, and then with the context and the background that you have given, how then should the everyday South African understand the judiciary in South Africa and its makeup with all of these people who bring it into disrepute?
No, obviously, the thing is, like, if you are, and I always say to people that when you hear a certain view expressed by a certain person, please go and do your own research first. Don't just jump on Twitter, jump on Instagram and say, okay, the judge is corrupt. If you don't know, speak to a legal practitioner, say that this judge talked about this principle and he applied it and he said, no, the application cannot be granted. Can you please explain to me before you actually go and have your own little legal discussions there without having the legal training and background? Then thereafter you can enter the fray if you have an informed decision or you've attained more information on a specific topic before you can engage in it. Because we saw that, and it started off with the Oscar Pistorius trial, that a lot of people suddenly thought that they have LLBs, they understand how the law works. And everybody was talking about dolus eventualis and dolus directus. But if you go look at what the principle is about and how it was interpreted, and there was already case law that speaks to this principle, then you'll understand. A judge cannot just go on a tangent because there's a higher court that already decided on this issue, so he's bound by the precedent. So sometimes people don't know these things that work in the background. And also, what was the discussions that happened between the people in chambers, because you have the judges' chambers and you'll have the two legal representatives or three or four, whoever is involved in the matter. They will come up to certain agreements in the chambers and say, okay, we're not going to canvass this point of law, or this fact is not in dispute, and then they just see maybe the final product of how things unpack, and then they draw legal conclusions, which they should not be doing because they are not fully versed with the entire facts of a specific case.
So essentially, Elton, upgrade your own knowledge.
That's essentially what I'm saying. Before you speak, upgrade your knowledge. If you don't, speak to a person that you are comfortable with, to get the information, and thereon you can now, because law, I always say law is about logic and common sense, because you apply common sense and then you look at what does the law say if I apply common sense to doing 1, 2, 3, and then you quickly see, but okay, this is what, and there is now case law or there's legislation that stops me from doing this. If it's a constitutional matter, then the high courts have inherent jurisdiction to actually change the law, but then it needs constitutional validation by the highest court of the country.
Thank you very much to Elton Hart. He's a legal analyst.